what does success look like when you guys work? Like how are you, like, is there something you can measure towards? Because it's such a big, complex problem. What's your piece that you can affect, or what does it look like when you guys get a win?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's certain legislation we've worked on where we've seen that be successful in past. We've seen how our research has contributed to, policy wins and a greater understanding of an issue. So we can certainly see that. You know, I think that some of our work at Insight, we really are sometimes a- ahead of where other folks are in their thinking. And when I say ahead, like future thinking, I mean, we'll put an idea out there and initially people will say, wow, that's kind of crazy. So, I mean, for example, our work is centered on racial equity. And, we've come to really think that racial equity is also becoming kind of muddied. Like, what does it mean? How do you know you're successful? How do you measure it? And so we really, start to think about a foundational architecture of our economy that's built on anti-Blackness, right? And I'll explain that in just a second. But so we developed this framework that says we can center Blackness in policy, right, to address anti-Blackness and really address the most marginalized. And so some people see that as radical, but it's a logical framework to solve for racism embedded in our economy and our politics. And so that's what I mean by kind of pushing the envelope on some of these issues. So when we think about anti-Blackness, and I call it a foundational architecture because our economy was built on this very notion of anti-Black racism. And when we think about how our economy was shaped through slavery, right, that this was not just, the fact that there were some plantations and some, slaves in the South worked on them. This was a global economy, right? And it really allowed us as a nation to develop like business models from this architecture, right? How we thought about collateral, how we thought about depreciation, even how we thought about labor, and how you could actually, yes, and how you could really extract from labor, how you could force labor to be more productive, right? And, we can see it today in surveillance, and we think about how we can push workers to produce more. So this isn't something this is very foundational to our nation's economy, but also to the rules of our economic policies, right? I just talked about the social safety net. And our social safety net is predicated on tropes like a welfare queen narrative. It's even when people say, when you think about poverty, who do you think about, right? And people often say Black people, right? And because of that, we have very punitive systems. And so what if we really just thought about centering the most marginalized and thought about what would it look like in our policy if we can actually solve for anti-Blackness? That's a new way of thinking about racial equity. I think it's a very unifying, actually, it's a way to build solidarity because we're all impacted by it. Think about this, right? So when you think about Medicaid expansion and the fact that a lot of states have chosen not to expand Medicaid, and you listen to the narratives behind that, it's these same kinds of things about deservedness. Who is it hurting? Yes, it's hurting Black people, but it's also hurting white people, and maybe even to a greater degree, right? So these, anything that's really predicated on this notion ensnares everyone that's in it. It ensnares everyone that needs that policy, that needs that program, to survive, to be able to be, moved up economically. It's really fun. It's something that we don't talk about because it's so difficult for us to think about our economy in that way. But when we look at a lot of policies, you can go back and see how they're embedded in anti-Blackness and why we can't move the needle on certain policies.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think a lot of the bigger challenges, you're right, is that it's less on the policy, it's more on the narrative too, because there are certain sides on the right actually don't want to hear that, or it's tough for them to hear that. Probably because it cuts against the first narrative that they earned their way, right? The current system was successful from a dollars and cents standpoint. We became the wealthiest country in the world, so that's, I think, just the numbers. But busted and twisted in how we got there. And it's now at a point where, sure, we're still like, you have more and more and more and more people piling up at the bottom. And I'm at the point now, and I think many are, where it needs to be fundamentally shifted. And so you can't tweak on the margins. You can't change from the inside. It has to be fundamental. And that's what always drew me to universal basic income. It drove me to cash payments, that sort of cash relief, because it would fundamentally start. It wouldn't be the only fundamental, but it would start to rewrite the rules of the economy, where your income level doesn't start at zero. In your view, you guys are based in Oakland, which nearby Stockton, California was the first city to really pilot basic income. On a cash relief standpoint, or if you wanted to start rewriting the fundamental rules, like how would you go about that, right? Let's say, hey, I had the money and I had the political will and skill to execute it. What does that mechanically look like on your end? And then maybe we can back into the narrative that needs to happen to do that. But mechanically on cash relief, how would you envision that from your end?
What's really amazing about the pilots that we're seeing is it's helping us really think about how we can design an entire system, right? It's really shredding those myths about what we think cash would do, right? Everyone was geared up to think this is going to, what's going to happen. People are going to go out and not know how to spend the money, and this wouldn't, make a difference. But what we're seeing is quite the opposite. And I think, one, living here in California, knowing that, wages really just can't keep up with the cost of living, even with high minimum wage laws here, that the cost of living is outstripping wages, that this like pilot of $500 a month made a significant difference in people's lives. I mean, it enabled people to actually work more. It enabled people to take care of their families, meaning those who are caretakers. And we've got to think about the care infrastructure. I mean, it's critical in coming out of this pandemic. It helped people, pay down debt. It helped people, which I think is one of the biggest issues. It gave people a greater sense of peace of mind. It helped people deal with the stress and all the things that manifest from stress, from being short on money every month. And so it's teaching us that we can really have a new way of operating in this country if we think about really moving away from punitive approaches and really helping people get what they need and trusting them to say, I know what's really best for my family. I think, even looking at the pilot in Jackson, Mississippi with Black mothers and saying, finally, like, I can take my kid to the ocean. I can get them extra help in school. All of the things that make our lives worth living, and I think that, those of us who are really believe in cash see it for all of those reasons, see it for people's ability to really be who they're meant to be. I mean, it's not going to solve every issue, but certainly it can solve for, being able to say, I don't have to worry whether I'm going to eat next week. I don't have to worry if I have to juggle between trying to keep the lights on and figuring out how to take care of the needs of my child. So, yeah, I think that it's providing us with an opportunity to reimagine broken systems that have been in play for decades.
For us, the press narrative that was so frustrating was that people said Andrew was going to get rid of other benefits in addition to cash, and never said that. He said on the margins you could opt in, but never ever said, and he never would. Like, he's like, the point. Like, if anyone listens to him, like, why is he running? Is to fix it, not to cause more problems. Jeez.